So this is a sample portfolio that I've put together yesterday to show you kind of what the final product is gonna look like. So what you're gonna do, right, is you are going to select 3 poems. You did one yesterday, you're gonna do one today and one tomorrow. And the idea here is that you are picking poems that you've already read, already annotated, except for the one new one that you were to include. So in this portfolio, there's several different kinds of annotations because it doesn't necessarily matter which kind you're doing. So this is in Schoology on Thursday. This poem is The Applicant, right? It's color coded. It's got some notes to the side of it. It's just your typical annotation. The second one here is one done by hand. This is Those Winter Sundays, which you read in class by Robert Hayden. And so you see that's just pen and highlighter, as a lot of your annotations already are. And the last one is screenshots of the Emily Dickinson archive to compare the Franklin edition to the Johnson edition. I didn't also mark this up. What I did instead was had them side by side and wrote my notes. So I wanted to show you that your annotation basically just has to have your observations. They could be in any real form. So the collected annotations will be turned in one spot on Friday. So I'll show you where that is. So put them together in either one document, or if you don't want to do that, you can upload 3 documents. And so on Friday, it says there's a Whitman and Dickinson portfolio annotation upload. Click it and it'll let you put your 3 submissions in there. Okay, so you'll upload 3 things to that, and those will be like your collected annotations. All right, so that's the first part. The second part is, for each poem, you are to write 250 words. Those 250 words are not supposed to be necessarily just a summary of the poem. That's not what we're looking for. Instead, you're going to look at your annotation and see what you're making an observation about, right? What is in your annotation that you can work from? And then you're going to create a claim or a mini thesis. So here are some sample writing paragraphs that are 250 words approximately on these 3 annotations. And so what I've done is I've just put them MLA format, and I put poem number 1, The Applicant. And then I have the written paragraph. So I have underlined the claim. You do not have to, but I think that that's a good idea so that you know what you are trying to argue or know what you are trying to think through in your writing. So The Applicant by Sylvia Plath is a twisted version of the usually romantic idea that partners complete each other. Usually when we think of marriage, it's sweet and a partnership, but not so here. In this poem, both people have got something missing. In fact, according to the poem, he has to have something missing or the union can't work, and she can fill it. In fact, she only exists to fill it. The she in the poem has no personality of her own and is more often referred to as it. The short phrases and frequent questions sound like one person badgering another, and the speaker sounds more like the ringmaster in a circus with a freak show, as we can see in lines 36 and 37. And you see we're using textual evidence here. It can sew, it can cook, and a slash as if you change lines. It can talk, talk, talk. Or an auctioneer in the last line, will you marry it, marry it, marry it? And the bride is first referred to as sweetie, which is gross in the context of her being referred to by her body parts. Then she, and then as merely it the last 11 times by my count, making her less of a person. Although the speaker pretends to be telling the you of the audience to marry, the poem gives more of the idea that marriage is a one-sided arrangement and one without love or joy based only on the needs of the speaker. So yeah, this sample writing is looking at the observations from the applicant, which is a really weird, strange look at marriage, particularly Sylvia Plath's marriage. So the claim here is that it's a twisted version of people completing each other, which is not what's happening. So then, Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. Says Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden uses imagery that describes both physical and emotional pain in the speaker of the poem. So if we go here, we can see from my annotation. The first stanza describes the father's physical pains from the blue-black cold and his cracked hands. The second stanza highlights the pain of the cold, which causes splintering and breaking. There's also the mysterious chronic angers reference, which I read as strictness or militant order in the household, but which can also easily be read as abuse, especially if readers look up Hayden's troubled history with his father. The last stanza shows emotional/mental pain, mentioning the speaker is acting indifferently and how he now understands, quote, love's lonely and austere offices. The pain of being ignored or alone are often different than wounds from hard labor, but they both hurt us. It is inferred that the speaker has experienced both when he refers to himself, saying, what did I, where I is bolded, know? The last line of each stanza is reflective in nature, where the speaker considers the relationship with the father. Each line looks back with regret, guilt, and hurt. No one ever thanked him, fearing the chronic angers, and what did I know of love's lonely and austere offices? The audience feels the regret in that repetition. The sensory details of the polished shoes, the making of the fires, and the father waiting until it was warm to call all show that the speaker's memory is clearer now as an adult looking back on those winter Sundays. So, second thought here, this has a lot to do with structure and form. Although you'll notice that this isn't specifically referring to like the lines by numbers. And so it's a little bit harder to see the reference. Paragraph number 3 is a comparison of Dickinson's poem, Pain Expands the Time. So if we look at the annotation, says pain expands the time, fully embraces the paradox of grief, which can feel like both an eternity and a fleeting moment. Both variants that I examined, the Franklin and the Johnson, seek to separate pain as a searing and singular event using punctuation and line breaks. So we're going to talk about how those punctuation and those line breaks are working. And if you look in the annotation, that's at least in part what we have. Both poems begin Pain Expands the Time, where the Franklin version uses its characteristic short dash, that's called an N dash, where the Johnson prefers the long or M dash. However, the significant thing is that both variants set pain apart with punctuation. So we see pain, it's separated here, it's separated here. The second line of Franklin is ages coil within, but the Johnson offers a choice of lurk in place of coil, giving the ages a much more sinister quality, though both verbs give an animalistic feel. When you hear the word coil, you think of snake. When you hear the word lurk, you think of some animal creeping around. The third and fourth lines choose the same punctuation and capitalization for the minute circumference of a single brain, emphasizing how individual grief grieving time, and passage of time during grief truly are. In the second stanza, pain is paired in both variants with contracts, which is a very physical choice. By giving pain an action associated with things getting smaller, right? If we contract, we squeeze in and get smaller. The speaker helps the audience to know how much grief can compress a human heart. Occupied with shot is also the same in both variants. I struggled with this line, but I think one interpretation could be shot through, as in grief puts holes in our worlds and causes them to be wounded. Both variants also show the possibility of the word triplets for gametes. Dickinson appears to have preferred the word gametes, which we can see gametes of eternities versus triplets of eternities. Likely because it is an indefinite number compared to triplets, more applicable to such a vast word as eternity. The last line contemplates adding flit or show in front of or in place of are, which begins the final phrase, are as they were not. The simplicity of are is more stark than either of the other options. Flit seems too light and show too vague. Dickinson is a good companion whose words will simply hold you as you mourn, whatever version you choose. So this side-by-side comparison is easy to talk about in that form. You just have to be very, very thorough. So these sample writing portfolio paragraphs are going to go in the Friday folder that says 3 paragraphs upload. So 3 paragraphs of 250 words or more from each of your poems. And if you upload one and then you decide that you want to revise a bit and upload again after further instruction, that is absolutely fine with me. So then the last thing that I want to show you is the self-assessment. This is the thing that you do on your own with your own writing. So this writing portfolio rubric is in both Wednesday and Thursday. And so here's what you'll do. You're going to look over your writing, not necessarily the annotation. The annotation is to help you get ideas for what to write about and give you observations to think about. And it should guide your writing. But the annotation is not the writing itself. The writing portfolio rubric asks how you've learned things. 1 says, well, this learning goal still has significant work. It's not doing what it needs to do. Number 2 says, this learning goal needs some work. It demonstrates understanding of that learning goal, but has not yet achieved it. 3 is satisfactory, so it's meeting the expectations outlined in the learning goal. And 4, it's excellent. It exceeds those expectations. So what you're going to do with each of your written pieces is you're going to assess them. So let's look at revision. It demonstrates revisions that reflect developments in reading and thinking, as well as polishing for clarity and style. So how far has this piece come in thinking about it? So if we think about the applicant, that's a very polished piece, definitely deserving of a 4. The textual evidence. Textual evidence in the writing section. There is definitely a lot, but it's not always balanced with analysis throughout, so giving it a 3. It does have an excellent claim or argument, which is very clearly marked, and the structure, clarity, and style are all very good. So we look at piece 2, Those Winter Sundays. So that's this one. It says he uses imagery that describes both physical and emotional pain. You'll note that this one doesn't refer once to a line number. It just says the last stanza or whatever. So it's not always as specific, but there is always analysis afterwards. So in piece 2, this could have been revised further, right? To further polish the reading and thinking. The evidence is good, but the claim maybe not as much so, but it's still very clear. The structure's good. And really think about at what level you're performing, right? Are you meeting those expectations with your writing? Because this is a self-assessment, this is different than me grading it. You really have to think about your work and looking at it and seeing if it meets that. Then piece 3, I put the strongest piece of this portfolio at the end, right? So it says it's separating pain as a singular and a series event using punctuation and line breaks. So though it hasn't necessarily been revised, it's definitely very clear. And a 3 was possibly a little bit skimpy for this one. This one would have been probably worthy of the 4. So don't undersell yourself if it's good. So evidence, claims, and structure all gave it a 4. This is a very good portfolio. This is a very strong portfolio. It doesn't need hardly any, if any, additional work. And so does this portfolio demonstrate the writer's ability to read and think broadly against different poetic structures and themes? I say yes. These are 3 very different works that are looking at poetry in different ways. The annotations suggest that the writer has different ways of looking at things. So I think, yes, absolutely, it's doing that. And I think it's fair to give this portfolio's range of 4. So if we add all those up, that's 49 out of 52, which equals a 94. So there are still some things that could be done, particularly in the Robert Hayden piece, possibly adding some line numbers to clarify, or revising a bit further to improve the language. But on the whole, it's really very good. So that piece of writing you will turn in on Friday under the self-assessment. I want you to either mark it by hand and upload a JPEG or PDF or PNG, or you can mark up the JPEG on your own and then save a copy of it and upload it. So those are the 3 things: the collected annotation, the sample writing, and the portfolio self-assessment. What you've been doing each day is picking a poem to go through this process and do everything with it. So it probably feels like you're not quite ready to turn it in because you're doing each piece at a time. So the sample portfolio puts them together the way you've been doing it in class. So here's the applicant. Start with the annotation, then move to the writing. 250 words. What can I say about what is being said in this poem? And really thinking about what is my claim and starting with that if you wish. So that, and then kind of looking at that. These were the initial impressions of this writing portfolio piece 1. You don't have to do it like this. I put in a screenshot so you could see the process. It goes annotation, writing piece, portfolio. Annotation, writing piece, portfolio, self-assessment. So if you look back, this score was originally lower. And this annotation originally didn't have the additions and stuff. So improving that annotation to make sure it has everything it needs. And then self-assessing it. This is the one where I gave it full marks. So that's kind of what you're looking at. Like I said, there's kind of 2 ways to do it. You can do all the annotations and then all the writing and then all of the self-assessment, or you can do one poem at a time, which when Michelle and Sam and I discussed it, seemed like the easier way of doing it, so that you could really refine and revise one piece of writing and then set it aside and let it be done. Do a second piece of writing, revise it, work hard on it, set it aside, let it be done. The last thing I want to draw to your attention, if I can pull it up, is writing claims about a poem. This is in Wednesday, the step-by-step self-assessment guide. It says, write 250 words that make a claim about that poem. The claim should take the form of an observation that you can argue with evidence. Whitman's speaker treats the prostitute in Song of Myself 15 kindly because he sees her as just another worker alongside other laborers. So think about it that way, right? In Song of Myself 15, we have all these different laborers, and he includes the prostitute. He's like, hey, it's just her job. Maybe people treat her poorly, but that's rather unfair. If you feel like your writing is not long enough, your claim can become larger and include more things. For example, you could turn that 250 words into how Whitman is kind to multiple women laborers in his poem. So instead of just writing about the prostitute, you could then decide to include the spinning girl in order to expand that and make sure that it hits 250 words. I really am expecting you to revise the writing you've already done to make this easier. So you're not to use outside research, okay? And I really would like you to use your annotations you've already thought through and already feel you understand. If you're like, nope, I don't like my work, it was really hard, then pick a poem from the options offered that you really, really like and really understand, and you're like, I know exactly what I will say about this. I have thoughts, I have ideas. Say that piece is Whitman's 1861. That was the first year of the Civil War. And you're like, I'm a history buff. Like, I already feel that I get this. Armed year, year of the struggle, no dainty rhymes or sentimental love verses for you, terrible year. You're like, yeah, this is my jam. That's fine. You can write a whole new one. The point, though, is to make sure that the writing is the best it can possibly be, and then doing a self-grade of it. That's how you do a portfolio. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to take some questions.